Welcome to the Night Club, guys. It's your host, the Night Wrencher. Now, last week I brought out a video. Well, actually, I brought out two videos. One was the unboxing of the Daytona Sensors SSLS Smart Spark LS ignition system, and then I put up a failure video of my Msd 6014. After I went ahead and posted both of those videos, I got a lot of people from both sides bombarding me with questions, asking me specific information. Why am I switching? What was wrong with my box? Are you sure you didn't do anything wrong? And in this video, I'm going to go ahead and encompass all of that, all the information that I gathered together, and we're going to do a side-by-side comparison between these two systems. I'm going to start off by doing a feature set comparison between these two boxes. So let's go ahead and get, these guys are empty already. As you guys know, this is my third Msd 6014, and then this is my first Daytona Sensors SSLS. Comparing the exterior of these two boxes, although they both take up the same amount of square footage, the Daytona Sensors does tend to beat out the Msd 6014. In terms of vertical space that it takes up, the Daytona Sensor, because of the way it's shaped and the way it's set up, it's about an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch shorter, smaller than the Msd 6014. So looking at the exterior of these two boxes, they're both made out of aluminum. The Msd has an aluminum plate on the bottom, or galvanized steel, pretty sure it's aluminum, riveted to an aluminum body where it houses the circuit board for the Msd system. On the Daytona SSLS, we're looking at an aluminum housing as well. The difference is this thing is an epoxy resin filled, and the circuit board is internal, and it's completely non-serviceable, and you really, if you ever like punch a hole through it or you burn it up or whatever, you're not going to be able to service this. Whereas something like this, you could probably cut the rivets out, separate the plate, and then work on the circuit board there. I know on the older 6AL boxes for like small block Chevys, Dodge, Mopar, Ford, you could go ahead and separate the casing and repair some of the transistors that would go bad, that would prevent the box from firing. The 6014 has a single dial that allows you to go through all the different modes. You've got 4 custom ones on the left, and then you got the rest are preset LS1 on the top, truck on the bottom, and then some HO timing maps on the side. The Daytona Sensors box is a little bit more unique in that a lot of features that are in the software internal to this, you can actually adjust them out here. So you've got your rev limit, some sort of advance, and some sort of mode. Although I haven't gone through and read the instructions fully yet, I do know and recognize that these are features that you would normally find inside the software of the 6014, which is nice to know that if you don't have your laptop and you really want to change your rev limiter, you could just go ahead and adjust it right here. Do I like that the little knobs are on here? I don't know. I do like going into the laptop and adjusting it manually, electronically I mean, versus doing it manually on here. But that's just preference. I'm sure they had a reason to do it like this. Moving on to the next system, we're going to look at the connectors. We've got a series of Delphi connectors right here, very similar to the ones that GM uses in all of their stuff. And then on the Daytona, we have some Deutsch, I believe they're called Deutsch connectors, connecting here. As you can see in construction, although they almost have the same amount of pins, the Deutsch connectors do tend to take up a lot less space. And if you go ahead and measure from end to end on the Msd box, the Daytona Sensors box, even if it's mounted like this, beats out, and it's a lot more form-fitting than this right here. Moving on to the feature set on the harnesses. Putting the two harnesses side by side, you're going to immediately be able to tell that the Msd harness has significantly more wire than the Daytona Sensors, and that's something I noticed right away as soon as I pulled open the package and started identifying everything. A lot of the connectors are pretty much the same, but it's the way they're set up that makes them different. In terms of construction, if I grab the coil harness connector and then I grab a coil harness connector for the Msd 6014, you can tell that the gauge of wires are pretty much exactly the same. The style of the connectors, if anything, they're almost pretty much exactly the same connector. It doesn't look like either of them are using knockoff connectors, and it actually says right there, Delphi PA66, and it says so on both of these connectors. The MSD is nice because it does label your wires. It says CC, D, B. So it tells you exactly how they're supposed to be set up. I don't know if it's for us. I don't know if it's an internal thing to make sure that all of our wires are set up correctly. And also on the opposite end, you can see the sections that go into the boxes. So we've got this side that has 3 connectors and 2 wires. On the MSD side of things, you're looking at something that's a little bit more complicated. So you have same 2 connectors like you would with the Daytona, but you've also got the power wire that comes out of here that feeds the boxes. So this is going to go to a fused 12 volt ignition, and then this is going to be the ground wire for the box as well. The other connector is the one that controls your cam and crank sensor. This one will have your 2-step, step retard, and I believe your tack wires. They're all set up right here. The difference between the MSD harness and the Daytona harness, as you guys can see, this is a very simple one harness application. What's weird about the MSD box is that they've actually split up their harness into 3 sections. You have the coil / main harness that's right here. You've also got your cam sensor harness right here that goes into the box. And then you've got an optional harness for a second series of crank sensors right here. So as far as I know, you've got an option between running the front mounted cam sensor and the rear mounted cam sensors, which are on the cast iron and aluminum block variants, whereas the Daytona Sensors only gives you the option for the front mounted. I've heard and I've been told that you can run the rear mounted cam sensor, but I will be able to verify that in a slightly future video. If we go through the harness individually and we go through the different pinouts, you'll be able to tell that the MSD harness has some things that the Daytona harness does not. You're going to notice a few things. So on the coil harnesses that we looked at earlier, we have a ground wire that comes out of the Daytona box. We have a ground wire that comes out of the connector for the MSD harness, but it's got a individual ground right here. It doesn't run it through the main harness. If we go ahead and look at the coil harness connector that's on the opposite side, you're going to see that it's the same way. So each of these are supposed to go to their respective heads, whereas the Daytona box actually only has one ground, and as far as I know, it's the ground for everything. So that's something to keep in mind if you're worried about electronic interference, whether multiple points of ground or just one ground. That can be debated a little bit. The next thing you're going to notice is that the MSD box has a provision for a coolant temperature sensor. So with the function of the coolant temperature sensor on an MSD box, especially one that runs on a standard carbureted system, the purpose of this is to measure the temp of the engine when you're starting it cold. When you attempt to start your engine when it's cold, the MSD box is going to add timing through the use of the engine coolant temp sensor. When it sees that it's cold, it's going to add timing. When it sees that it's getting too hot, it's going to retard timing. A lot of people don't even bother hooking it up, and in fact, even the instructions say you don't have to hook it up. It's not one of those things that's very useful. I know on the very first box that I owned, this was non-functioning, which meant that my box always saw 120 degrees. It never saw higher, it never saw lower, it was stuck. On the other 2 boxes that I owned, the coolant temperature sensor did in fact work, and I was able to add timing while it was cold, and then when it was warm, it was able to back off timing. I drove over a year without the functionality of the coolant temperature sensor until I later got a different box, and I realized that the sensor was okay, but the box was not okay. But it made me realize that the coolant temp functionality isn't like the end-all be-all. You don't really need it, especially if you do have a choke on your carburetor, or even me who doesn't have a choke, just holding your throttle for 30 seconds and then easing off and letting it idle and then go doing the rest of whatever you need to do works just the same as letting your coolant temperature decide what you should or shouldn't be adding in terms of timing. It didn't surprise me that the Daytona box didn't even bother to include that functionality. What I really like about the Daytona harness is that if they thought that it wasn't absolutely necessary, they didn't go ahead and include it, because it just adds more wires, more clutter, more cost, and more programming to an already delicate system. Moving on, we're going to notice that the Daytona box has a connector that the Msd box does not. And that is going to be the connector for an external map sensor. So to me, the biggest difference between the Daytona box and the Msd box is that the Daytona box is almost 100% serviceable, almost. And what I mean by that is, on the Msd 6014, we use what's called an internal map sensor. It uses this pipe that comes, this hose that comes out of the box, to go into a hose that goes inside of your intake manifold, and then the intake manifold is going to pull vacuum. The internal map's going to see it and then report it to the PCM. No extra wires, one hose, one hookup, good to go. The issue isn't when it's functioning, the actual issue comes when it stops functioning. So on this box, this has a not dead, but very limited map sensor. It only, on this particular box, it only reads about 6 inches of vacuum at idle, and it will read anything below that. But if I'm cruising at 12, it'll read 6. If I'm driving aggressively, like at 10, it'll read 6. If I'm wide open throttle and my vacuum gauge says 0, this will also read 0. So it maxes out at 6. I have no idea why. I don't know if it's a programming issue. I don't know if it's a crappy sensor that they put in here. But if the map sensor inside of here goes out or it's non-functioning, there's really nothing you can do except return it and then ask for a new one. On the Daytona Sensors box, the map sensor is external, so it actually opens up a couple different options, whereas you can run the stock, factory, GM, 1-bar, 2-bar, 3-bar sensors, and then you can buy the aftermarket sensors made by Daytona Sensors themselves that you can go ahead and hook on. They're a little bit more race car style and a little bit more high performance if you really want that. Supposedly they have better adjustability and they refresh faster, but that's to be determined. I can't say that for a fact. But this is awesome because if your sensor goes out, you can go to any parts store and just go grab a sensor and put it back on, and you should be on your way. Another huge detrimental part of the Msd system is the inclusion of the tuning port on the side of the housing. So as you guys can see, you've got your port right here, and you're supposed to take your tuning cable and just plug it in right there. What I like about this is that it's on the box, it's accessible. As long as the box is accessible, you're going to have accessibility to tune, and if you have a long enough cable, you're going to be able to hook it up to the box and then run it into the cab or wherever you're sitting and start doing your tuning process. My problem with the port is that I've worked with a lot of computers, I work with a lot of smartphones, I work with a lot of electronics, and the ports, charging ports in general, tend to go out very, very quickly because we tend to use them a lot. So the issue lies when you've got your tuning cable hooked up, you are now creating weight. You're creating stress along the side of the box. So if you just leave the cable hooked up to your box and you're driving, you're creating vibrations, you're creating stress, and you're putting a lot of pressure on the pins of your tuning port. If you go ahead and decide that you're going to tune and then take the cable off, well, every time you put it in, every time you pull it out, you're wearing out the cable. You're wearing out the port that is supposed to be pretty much your only connection to the Msd box. How Daytona Sensors did this differently was that they have a very similar interface that uses the exact same cable, but it's a separate box that comes with your system, and you can just as easily just plug in and leave it plugged in, dangling off the side of your cab. You can leave it dangling under your dash. You can leave it dangling on the side of your wall. Put double-sided tape and put it on your thing. This is a little bit more versatile. First of all, it's flexible, so any weight that it has, it can easily distribute it along something else. But the main thing is that even if you manage to damage this, even if you manage to destroy your cable, break your cable inside, break the box, you can just call up Daytona Sensors. There's a part number right here. You unplug this one, and then you go and order a new one, plug it back in, and then you're back on the road if you really think you're going to break it. With the MSD, if you break that pin, if you destroy the plug, you have no more access to anything inside the box. If you have an internal break that's preventing any kind of signal from entering the box, your box is as good as done. You really need another box or find a way to have MSD warranty it. As you guys can see, both harnesses have a series of wires that are added on to the connectors of the respective boxes, and each wire is supposed to have a specific function or output that is designed to work with the box. So starting with the 6014, we've got the white coil tack wire. This is a wire that produces a standard HEI style square wave. It is very compatible with the series, any kind of like a myriad of aftermarket tacks, so you can go ahead and just wire it in. It should be fine. On my Toyota cluster, I was able to use instructions on how to convert HEI signal to a Toyota signal, and I was able to get my tack working properly there. So the tack wire, I haven't had any issues with it producing the wrong kind of tack. Everything's been good there. The pink and blue wires are both step retard and two-step. So if you want to have a little bit of launch control, if you want an input for nitrous, you've got these two wires right here that you can use to retard timing in order for you to function properly down the strip. Moving on, we've also got the red power wire, which is a pretty heavy gauge. It's actually the heaviest gauge wire out of all the other wires that they have. This is supposed to take on a 7.5 amp fuse, and it's supposed to be on a relay pulling voltage directly from the battery. That's how my truck is set up, but a lot of people just like to run it off the ignition. That's not the proper way to set this up. These boxes need clean, consistent voltage, and any kind of interruption with the ignition key will cause the box to start to cut out. So you really want to run this properly on a fuse and a relay to prevent any kind of problems down the road. The other wire that comes out of the same connector is the ground wire, if I can just pick it up off the ground. And then this is the same gauge wire, pretty close, yeah, no, one size smaller gauge wire for the ground, as close to the battery or on the battery itself in order for you to have a nice clean ground. Same thing for the power, you don't want any kind of interruptions. On the Daytona sensor side of things, you've got a couple wires coming out of the connectors as well. It's the same basic thing. So you've got the power wire for the Daytona box. I'm assuming it uses a 5 amp or a 7.5. The difference that I notice here is that the Daytona uses a slightly thinner gauge similar to the Msd ground wire, whereas the Msd uses probably one size thicker gauge for their power. Not too detrimental, but it is a little bit strange. They also use a tack wire, same color as the Msd. It is white, well, not the same color. The Msd is actually gray. And then you got white for the Daytona box. As far as I know, the Daytona box also uses the same square wave pattern as the Msd, so it's really pretty much plug and play. And then you've got the yellow and blue wires, which would take up the place of pink and blue wires on the Msd 6014, which is step retard and two-step. There is also a third function that you can add to these connectors that allows you to run a third switch power. It said it's pin 12 on I believe the black connector, and you can add a third switch power, and basically all three of these wires would retard or change the timing in one shape or another by activating a switch. A lot of it has to do with like launch control and maybe line lock, maybe for nitrous solenoids. And that is what these are actually supposed to be used for. So on the back of the box, you've actually got diodes. I thought they were resistors when I was doing the unboxing, but they're actually diodes. So this diode is set up in line so that current can only run this way and can't go on that way. The reason they do that is so you don't have an accidental grounding from inside the box for when both of these solenoids ends up closing. The diode allows current to travel one way. It does not allow it to turn the other way. This is a little bit too complicated for me personally, but I can understand why people would want to do this, but I'm sure there are better ways than this to set up your your solenoids for nitrous. The Daytona Sensors also has an option for manual optional retard that you can buy. It's an option that you can hook it up to your box, and it gives you a dial for you to retard timing, add timing. It's basically for like tuning on the fly or different elevations or different, if you want to run a different tune to quickly and easily go through the different timing settings. That pretty much covers all of the features of the two boxes. In reality, the boxes, in terms of specifications, are pretty much tied. They do have a little bit different things here and there, but for the most part, they function almost identical. Right now, we're going to go ahead and move on to the cost comparison. Alright, moving on to the cost comparison, starting with the Msd 6014. If you look on the Holley website, the Msd brand new from the factory, no going through Summit, no going through eBay, directly from Holley, you're paying about $420, and it comes with the harness and the sub harness. There aren't any options, whether it's an LS1, an LS6, an LS2, an LS7. It's all a universal, basically a universal kit, and it's designed to work with any myriad of those engines, whether it's a front mounted, rear mounted cam sensor. The Daytona Sensors is priced a little bit differently. Out the door, you're looking at about $315 for the module and the USB interface. From there, you can go ahead and look on the Daytona website, and you're going to find that it gives you 4 options for harnesses. One's for LS1, LS6 style, another one for the LS2, LS7 style, and it's going to ask you if it's going to be intake manifold mounted or in cab mounted. Price for the harnesses are all the same, $225. And if you add the $225 to the $315, you're looking at about $540 for a complete system of Daytona Sensors. From late 2018 to now, I noticed that my box actually cost me $380 for the Msd 6014 when I got it. And now it's valued at $420. So the difference between the two boxes is about $120 before tax. It may seem like a big difference, but for a lot of people, the obvious answer is, well, I'll just get the cheaper box. Well, when you buy the cheaper box, you come with a couple different problems. Number one, although these claim that they're all made in USA, it's a pretty well-known fact that the boxes are assembled in USA, but the circuit boards inside are actually made in China. Whereas I was speaking to the director of sales or marketing, Adam Glow, and he assured me that all of the box, the enclosure, the circuit board, everything is made here in the United States. So you are paying a little bit of a premium for USA made quality and craftsmanship. The second thing is that Daytona Sensors, they put a lot of effort in making their system very modular, very serviceable. If, like I mentioned earlier, their USB interface is replaceable. Your map sensors are replaceable. If you switch up your harnesses, if you started off with an Msd 6014, they sell a harness to remove your 6014 and install a Smart Spark LS system in its place. I know that it works for the Msd 6010 and the 6012. I don't know if it works specifically for the 6014, but from their website it says Msd Conversion Kit. Basically what it does, it takes the connectors off your MSD harness, it plugs into there, and it uses the Delphi connector to connect there, and then it uses the Deutsch connectors to connect into here, and the harness that's inside of the vehicle, it remains untouched, which is actually a really cool feature if you've already went to the effort of extending wires, tucking wires, hiding everything, making everything for show, and now you have to rip it all apart to switch over to the Daytona Sensor. So Daytona actually made it possible for you to buy just the ignition module for $315, and then they make an adapter harness for $75, and now you've got a brand new ignition system, and you don't have to worry about the 6014 failures anymore. Second problem that I have is reliability in general. Although I haven't been able to run the Daytona Sensors, I have been able to talk to a lot of people that have run Daytona Sensors, and I've been able to talk to a lot of people running the MSD boxes. And the people, vendors specifically, that talk to me about these boxes say, oh, I sell over 300 of these and I've only had one go bad, or I've had this many people and I follow this many groups and I talk to this many people and none of them have ever had issues like the ones you've described. Let's assume it was user error and I've installed the box incorrectly. If you go ahead and install the factory harness on here connected to power and ground, you hook up your little tuning cable and you hook it up to your laptop, and you go and read what this box says in terms of the map reading, it's going to read you 6 inches of vacuum. And we're in ambient temperature without this being hooked up. It should read somewhere closer to like 15, 16 inches of vacuum. So that's not a wiring issue. That's not an installation issue. That is a box issue. And it hasn't just been with this one, it's been with 3 boxes. So I know vendors will come out and say, hey, so I haven't had these issues. But the fact of the matter is, we're having these issues whether you see them or you don't see them. You can't deny someone's experience when you go through 3 boxes and all 3 have a bad map sensor. I've had people that tell me that they've run their Msd 6014 for 5 years, and I've had people tell me that they run their Daytona Sensors box for several years. The difference between these and these is that a lot of people say I don't even use the map sensor, and the box by itself, wired correctly, runs great without the map sensor. And for these people, I think the only time, I think it was one person that said, oh, the box that I received wasn't turning on, and then they sent me a different box and that one did end up working. In terms of reliability, if I was to put both of these toe to toe next to each other and say which one's more reliable than the other one, I'd probably have to say the Daytona Sensors box, simply because of the way it's set up. You've got an aluminum enclosure just like you do with the MSD, but you've also got the epoxy resin that I mentioned earlier. What this does is it encases the circuit board completely. It doesn't allow air, it doesn't allow movement, it doesn't allow vibration. Everything is inside, contained, no matter what you're jumping, no matter where you're driving, no matter how bad your ride is and how much it shakes. You can probably assume that the transistors, that the resistors, that the capacitors inside of here are not vibrating, loose, and breaking. Whereas this one, specifically when my very first box broke, it was right after an off-road event in Cleghorn here in Southern California. And after I got home, the truck was just running god awful. I went through and checked grounds, I checked power and checked everything, and it was bad. The 4 coils were not lighting up. If you guys want to see the video on that, it's probably somewhere up here in the corner, where I diagnosed the MSD box, called MSD, got a new box, plugged it back in, and it's back to normal. But that's nice and dandy because Cleghorn is 30 minutes away from my house. What if I'm in Utah? What if I'm in Colorado? What if I'm in New York? How am I supposed to be getting in touch with MSD and sending me another box when I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere and I just drove my truck out? Whereas this Daytona Sensor Smart Spark LS, I'm probably not going to have any kind of vibration issues because it's all enclosed. I could probably drop it, and the only thing that's going to happen, I'm going to damage the casing. But inside of here, it's pretty much shock resistant. I'm going to be perfectly honest and transparent with you guys. I haven't driven with the Smart Spark LS, but there is not a doubt in my mind that this thing's going to function flawlessly. It sounds a lot like I'm trying to sell the Daytona Sensors box a little too hard. And it really is, because I'm just so frustrated with the Msd 6014. Their customer service is god awful. I was on hold for over 30 minutes before they finally hung up on me. I waited 6 months for them to actually send me out a replacement box, and I had to pay the shipping on the way there because they wouldn't send me a label. After 6 months, I said, you know what, I'll pay for the shipping myself, I'll send it back myself, and I paid for the shipping there, and I got my box 2-3 weeks later, which I'm glad I got my box. I'm thankful that they were able to honor their warranty, which is a 1-year warranty. It seems to be a little bit more flexible than the 1 year, but legally it's a 1-year warranty. Warranty on both boxes is very similar. You've got the 1-year warranty on both boxes, the Msd 6014 and the SSLS box. They both have a 1-year warranty, which promises that they're both free from defects and workmanship. So that's all fine and dandy. The difference is that when you call up customer service for the MSD, you'll tell them their problem, and they're like, okay, well, yeah, it kind of sounds like it's bad, go ahead and send it back. The guys at Daytona Sensors are so confident that their box comes to you working, fully functioning, that on their warranty page on their website, it says that we will guide you through all the technical details, and if they realize that something is actually wrong inside the box, they're going to take the box and actually examine the box. After the box is in their possession, they go through it, they're going to decide if they can repair it, if they're going to send you a new one. Whereas the MSD, it's like, well, I don't really know much about it. send it back and we'll send you a new one. And when they send you a new one, they don't take your box, examine it, try to fix it, and send you one. They will send you an entire kit. They will send you a whole new box and say, here you go, take this one. Will they check it to make sure the map sensor is working before they send it out to you? No. How do I know that? Because that's exactly what happened with me. I went ahead and called them, sent my old one back. They said, just keep the harness, keep everything else, send the box back by itself. Sent it there, waited 3 weeks. I received a whole new kit, brand new, in the mail, but map sensor was bad. Final thoughts on both boxes. Let's get this out of the way. If the Msd box functioned and had the reliability that it claims to have, the legacy of Msd, if it had that working for it, if everything worked from the factory the way it's supposed to, timing wasn't pulled when you're pulling too much boost, it wasn't accidentally adding timing instead of retarding timing, if you weren't having problems with dead map sensors, if you weren't having problems with, in general, if these boxes didn't have the kinds of issues that a lot of these people have, that probably most of the industry is actually ignoring, if they were to fix all of those issues and give us a good product, the product wouldn't be $400. It'd be closer to the $500 or $600 that the Daytona Sensors is. And that's because they actually have to invest in people going through these boxes and testing them before they ship them out to people and make sure that all the solder joints are good and it's not going to come apart when people are going off-roading. This is basically an off-road use only box. It should be able to handle the stresses of off-road. If we go through the Daytona box, like I already mentioned earlier, it's a very slim design. It's very capable. It has no air pockets where anything can move. Their customer service is excellent. I was able to get through in less than 5 minutes, and I was able to talk to one of the chief guys. The main drawback for the SSLS is that the Daytona Sensors don't actually advertise that you can run the rear-mounted cam sensor, and they pretty much only recommend the front-mounted cam sensors for two things. One is, I believe the rear cam sensor is powered by a 12-volt signal, whereas the front cam sensor is powered by a 5-volt signal. If you were to run this on a rear-mounted cam sensor, the voltage coming out of the box going into the cam sensor might not be able to give you a good enough wave pattern that allows you to run the engine at its best. The sensor at the front, obviously it's a 5 volts designed for a 5 volt. It takes less voltage to produce the same wave pattern, and you've got the cam sensor right there in the front. For serviceability, the front cam sensor is better, but a lot of these junkyard engines are rear-mounted cam sensors, and although David from Daytona Sensors told me that it's possible that it can run, I was told that it wasn't guaranteed, but it was possible to run this box on the rear-mounted cam sensors, so I'm going to be testing that out shortly in a different video. I think the main reason they decided to go through a front cam sensor only versus the versatility of the 6014 controller is mainly probably two things. And these are two things that I've come up with myself. I haven't really talked to anybody about it, but if it sounds plausible, it might be it. Number one, they probably used it as a cost-saving measure. Let's just go ahead and say that. If you add 2 times the programming, more harness, more options, the price tends to go up. And when you're dealing with a USA-made product, the margins are very, very, very slim, and you're going to try to maximize as much as possible. If that means switching to a simpler programming and offering less options and less wires, then that's just the way it has to be, because I'd rather have a very well-built USA-made box than a mediocre Chinese, half USA box. The second reason I think they did it is because the rear cam sensors on the LS engines are subject to a lot of abuse and a lot of heat because of the way they're located on the back of the engine, versus the failure rates on the front mounted cam sensors. They're much less likely to get destroyed. From what I know, the rear cam sensors are subject to more heat and more stress because of the way they're located on the back of the engine versus the cam sensors on the front that are located on the front cover. But as far as I know, the cam sensors like right under the front water pump, and you're typically not going to have to damage it. Like I mentioned earlier, in a future video, I am going to try to run the box on a rear mounted cam sensor application, and then I'm going to immediately switch over to the front. If I find that you have to run the front cam sensor in order for the box to run correctly, you're going to have to add another cost to the cost of the Daytona Sensors box. So aside from the $315 for the box and the $225 for the harness, you're actually going to have to add another $100 for the front cam sensor, the front cover, and you're also going to have to get a timing gear or cam gear for an LS6 or LS1 application that has the reluctor wheel built in versus the 5.3 that don't have any of that. So figure that it's going to be $540 plus whatever it costs to convert if I find that we can't run the rear cam sensors reliably. If I don't have a reliable system, if I can't make this box reliable using the stock truck sensors and I have to change over to the front sensors, if it's for the sake of reliability, I will gladly do it. I drive about 500 miles a week. I drive this truck like crazy. I have over 15,000 miles since I've originally put the swap in, and a lot of that has been a lot of highway driving and then a little bit of off-road and some spirited driving, just like anybody does with a project car. If I'm going to spend the money and I have to choose between a system, if I could go back in time and I found somebody to say, hey, these are the problems with both and this is probably what's going to happen, pick this one or this one, I would have picked the Daytona Sensors box in a heartbeat. That's what I would have picked regularly. If you're like super tight on a budget, if every penny counts and you're trying to just get it going and then later invest in it, or you're not worried about maybe it's failing, or you want to rely on Msd and their warranty, go ahead and get the 6014 box. While it runs excellent. If you get one that runs perfect and everything inside of it works and it runs great, then it runs great. Run it, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you don't have any kind of issues. If you want something a little bit more reliable, if you want to spend that little bit of extra money in order to get something that runs probably flawless, go get yourself a Daytona Sensors box and set it up and put your tune in it and let it go. So that pretty much goes for my comparison between the Msd 6014 and the Daytona Sensors Smart Spark LS system. Go ahead and let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.